Hi, I'm Jim. Welcome to the Unbound Performance Podcast, where we explore the world of sports and performance mindset training.
And I'm Caroline. Each week we talk about the strategies, habits, and mental framework that help us to excel. Let's get into today's episode. All right,
here we go.
here we go.
Let's concentrate.
A whole episode of us just sitting here.
I know. Chapter 7, concentration. Lots to chat about there.
Make sure we're in fact recording.
Are we recording?
We are.
Okay, cool.
Hopefully the audio works.
Hopefully. I'd hate to have to
Talk again.
make all this magic again.
Can you imagine?
It's going to be a tall order.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't have to worry about it. We're good. Concentration is one of those things I think is very typically not well understood or applied or even talked about. And every time I think of it, I always think of somebody from the sideline, coach, parent, spectator. Focus! Concentrate! To me, it's the equivalent of yelling at someone to relax.
Like that first episode. I don't know about the first episode, but you're talking about the parent that was like, breathe! Just breathe!
Yeah, that's right. Okay! Faster! I just, that's, so what invariably, when someone is told to concentrate or focus, what does the player do? They stare even harder. You know, like,
Get tense up is what they do.
yeah, they scowl and, okay, and
The focus scowl.
yeah, like, I just don't, I don't get it. And I mean, I was lucky that my parents were never yelling anything at me during games. And two, with the whole like, martial arts thing, you do learn very quickly what that actually means, what it looks like, what it feels like. And it's got nothing to do with becoming more rigid or doing anything harder.
Or even doing anything like intentionally.
Right.
Like,
and
intentionally focusing, intentionally concentrating sort of is the complete opposite of what the idea is intended to be.
Yeah, it just doesn't work. But you hear people yelling that. I mean, every game I ever attend, I bet someone yells focus or concentrate. And yesterday, I watched some of the NC State volleyball practice. They were kind enough to invite me over there. So while they were playing, doing drills, I always invariably watch the eyes of the passers, the people who are in serve receive and initiating the first contact. And I just see when their eyes like recognize the ball. And I always think that serve receive in volleyball or tennis or anything else is so mental.
Yeah.
And you can just see like when things are getting in the way of them just seeing the ball and passing it.
Right.
And then you see some kids who they are not burdened with that affliction. They have an early recognition. They're better at anticipating. So any sport like that where you have to track an object, the sooner you can pick it up, the better. And being yelled at to focus or concentrate is not going to be helpful in that process.
Focus and concentrate as just like a command. Like if you're in practice and your players are messing around, dancing, like, okay, focus on the task at hand. Yeah. But like to focus when your skills aren't sharp or whatever it's happening in the game, that's a different kind of, like, there's pay attention and then there's focus or concentrate, and those are two different things. So I think depending on the scenario, you might mean it one way or the other, but in the game setting, when it's kind of like a get it together kind of deal, like that just general command of focus and concentrate doesn't.
Yeah,
it's not just something that you just do.
Yeah,
it's two different things for starters, and it's not something you can just flip a switch and do.
Well, and that's, I've talked a fair amount in here about the quiet mind, and he literally kicks off chapter 7. The quiet mind cannot be achieved by means of intellectual understanding. Only by the experience of peace in a moment when the mind is relatively still is one sufficiently encouraged to let go more completely the next time. Very gradually, one begins to trust the natural processes which occur when the mind is less and less active. So we ended the last chapter with let it go, let it happen, but it's impossible to let it happen if you're straining.
Thinking about letting it happen.
Yeah, exactly. So the quiet mind is not achieved when someone's yelling at you to be relaxed or focused
or even when you're telling yourself to do that.
exactly,
it's not just the external commands that don't help, but telling yourself like concentrate, focus, just pay attention, like doesn't actually fix what it is you're trying to repair.
It's the self one taking control and not relinquishing it, which then doesn't let anything happen with self two. But the trick for a quiet mind, and this is where I think people miss how crucial it is to train that. You don't just quiet your mind on command. Okay, quiet, calm, and then it happens. Like especially when you're feeling stressed or pressure, or your mind is racing. You're not going to be thinking, "Oh yeah, I got to breathe," and so turning this into a habit where you get better and better at being aware that you need to quiet your mind, or even anticipating, like I get triggered, and if I have a game coming up, when am I liable to?
Yeah. At what point might this need to kick in?
Yeah, and so kind of anticipating that, even preparing beforehand, things like that. And we'll get to that here in a little bit. But he then moves into discussion. You can't just have an empty mind. That's extremely difficult to be able to get to that
going
level.
On there.
Yeah, and so like in a tennis example, he would talk about trying to not just watch the ball, but see the seams of the ball and recognize the pattern of the spin. It's giving your mind something to do that doesn't have anything to do with judgment or ego, creating tension. And so he talks a lot about that, and even going so far as to like listening to the sound the ball makes on the racket, whether it's you or your opponent, and listening when it's your opponent, that gives you some more cues to use in terms of then reacting, with your footwork and things like that. And he gave an example. He got really good at being able to watch the ball, and rather than play from behind the baseline when he was in receiving serve, he would play just behind like the service line, which was kind of freak out the opponent, and they were then their ego gets involved. Right. He talks about they're disrespecting my serve or whatever, and so they'd invariably be double faulting all the time. Occupying our mind with something is a way to, I think, facilitate like a relaxed concentration, as long as that something doesn't produce judgment, tension, pressure, but it just lets us play or perform whatever it is we're doing.
Yeah. In volleyball specifically too, I feel like that was something where, if you're playing defense and you've got a hitter that just keeps, scoring on you more or less. I always found, and I think just this is a version of sort of like watching the seams of the tennis ball or listening to the bounce hit kind of sound. When you can anticipate what the other team is doing before you have to react to it, that can create a sense of calm and preparedness that you otherwise, if you're just like reacting to every time, okay, when that hitter gets set, I keep having this negative outcome, versus watching, not everyone listening to this is going to understand this, but watching a passer, if their platform's high or if it's low, can tell you the speed of the play they're about to run next. If you can pay attention to that and be prepared for what might happen, rather than just when this hitter gets set, this is my outcome and I can't seem to fix it. Paying attention to those little cues ahead of time can make you that much more either relaxed and not in that specific moment when that hitter hits, or prepared because you kind of had that quick, like you and I talked about sort of the timing of, like you talked about in the net, catching the serve, like at what point do you catch the ball? Having those abilities in whatever sport you play, that just happened to be the sport that we were in the most, being able to have those small cues ahead of time create a sense of calm when the actual action at hand becomes real time.
Yeah, and it's really hard to do that if your mind is just jumping all over the place. The monkey mind kind of. And that's where sometimes you can see I know I've coached teams was like they were completely unaware of anything that was happening on the other side of the court because they were just in freak out mode.
Yeah.
And so rather than being able to read cues like approach angle for a hitter or
Yeah.
seeing where the set actually intended to go, maybe inside instead of outside, and it's all missed because our minds are not quiet. Quiet doesn't mean empty.
Right.
It just means you're not distracted by all these things that are totally irrelevant to the performance of your skill, whatever it happens to be. And so, just from the tennis standpoint, that's he gives some examples of things you can look at. I remember Warren Spahn was this great pitcher for the Milwaukee Braves and the Atlanta Braves. But he talked about hitting is all about timing, pitching is about disrupting that timing. So that's where they try, like every pitch is, regardless of the speed, it's going to try to come from the same arm slot, same release point. And it's like that for all of these. Like the sooner you can be aware of what's happening, then you can respond appropriately. But if you don't give yourself a chance until it's too late, then that just kind of snowballs into a messier and messier situation. So we talked about watching the ball, listening to the ball, feeling or being aware. That's another thing I really use a lot. Encouraging the performer to be aware of how their body feels. Be aware of, like, instead of telling them your left hand needs to be up and here, just ask them, where's your left hand on that? Instead of talking about the follow through, just ask them, like, where's your right shoulder finishing? Doesn't mean there's never any technical instruction, but at some point you have to let go of that and let them feel their way, see their way into improving what they're doing. And even in competition, if you're feeling instead of thinking, you're better.
Yeah.
Because it'd be one thing, if all our thoughts were just so wildly productive and helpful, but they're almost the exact opposite.
Yeah. I thought interesting too. He talked about, when you're feeling out of control, sort of returning to your breath. But more importantly, I think what he said was, when I come to return my breath or focus on my breath, I'm not making myself breathe a certain way. Like in competition or in the high stress scenario, returning to your breath is not the time to practice a new meditation. Like you're meditating outside of these activities so that in that moment you know how to just focus on your breath. I should finish what he said, which is I don't try to make myself breathe a certain way. I just pay attention to how my body is breathing, which is two different things. Trying to mid game. I mean, there are some meditative type breath works you can do in a timeout or something, or in a dead ball moment. But in the middle of a play or in the middle of a match or whatever it is, trying to say, okay, I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna do my box breathing, and like that's probably not as realistic. But that's more of an exercise for the practicing and training your mind and your breath work. But in the moment, just being able to take your brain off of the task at hand and just for a moment pay attention to how your body's breathing,
right. And
without controlling it.
He specifically tied it to the stroke, like where you inhale on one part of the stroke, exhale on the other, and rather than try to match your stroke to your breathing, you just breathe accordingly. The slow, deep, calming breath is definitely the one to use. Like
that one?
No,
it's just not the one.
That's called a yawn. Am I boring you?
Yeah. No.
I'm so used to it.
No, the bright light from the window makes me feel like I want to yawn all the time. I don't know why that is.
Oh, that's weird.
I know. Sorry. Anyway.
It's all right. But there is the slow, deep breath through your nose from your abdomen, your hara or dantian. That is has a physiological response. It is the relaxation response. It's the calming response. It's definitely the breath you want to practice using so that when, somebody's mom is screaming at you to breathe, you know which breath to take, as opposed to the slower, shallow breath from your chest, which produces the opposite of the relaxation response. So what I also really liked about this, he talks about this towards the end of the chapter, that this isn't just used for your whatever activity, if you're a bowler or a baseball player or whatever. But he talks about how he then flipped it, where he used tennis to improve his concentration skills
and other things.
and other things, throughout the day. And so you create this cycle where you're just improving at being able to focus your attention, be able to use your breath. And he says, which I was written in the 70s before the meditation mindfulness thing was really a huge deal, to the point of it being a cliche.
Sorry. Trying to hold it in, but then
I saw you struggling there. Too bad you ran out of energy drinks. But the idea that this cycle it becomes a weapon that you can use, that you can become more and more in control of your breathing in a way that you can use it to quiet your mind, give you some measure of control over your thoughts and emotions. As a result, that is the thing. Like, in so many, I just think it's ironic that in 1975, whenever this book was written, his answer at the end of this was meditation and breath work, and
long before it came a buzzword.
All it does for me is want to remind people again, don't view the meditation breath work as some exotic, weird, foreign thing.
Right.
Like it, and you don't have to be a Buddhist to do it.
Yeah, you don't have to sit there with your legs crossed and your hands, and you're like,
no. I sit in a chair like this.
Well, even if for the person who's not, thinking it's too woo-woo for them and it's just too weird. But I think a lot of people think that they only need to meditate in a high-pressure situation.
Right.
But if you think that you can not have to practice meditating first thing in the morning when things are pretty calm, and you can just flip the meditation switch mid-stress response, you've got it all wrong. Like, that's why practicing it for other scenarios is also just beneficial in itself. But practicing it in the lower stress scenarios where you're just paying attention, practicing, you can't just flip the switch and only do it when you're stressed. You have to be able to do it under all circumstances in order to be able to make it effective in the high pressure ones.
It's like anything. Like, if I'm not going to practice tennis and then just show up for a tournament, I don't think I'm going to win too many matches. I'm not going to perform well. And
it was like you talked about last night, practicing competing. Either practicing competing or practicing not competing. And if you don't go into practices every day going as hard as you can, and you think again that you can just switch on your go as hard as you can when it matters because there's a scoreboard involved, you've really got it seriously wrong.
It's so rare. I do remember reading about Franco Harris, who was a Hall of Fame running back for the Steelers on their 70s teams. And they did talk about him being one of the people who, like, when it was the game, he was a whole other level. But that is very unusual.
Right.
Very unusual. I think most people, how you practice is how you play. And he was a supremely talented player, obviously. But yeah, there was something that kicked in with him that didn't kick in during practice. But I would not hope for that. I would instead try to practice elevating my level of engagement as often as possible. Same with this. There's no way you're going to be successful in tapping into that as a way to calm yourself or focus yourself if you haven't trained it. And that's what, from a performance standpoint, there are psychological benefits, physical health benefits, and we can talk about meditation all day long. But from a performance standpoint, using that as a way to train your mind, and so often I'll talk someone into trying it, and they'll immediate feedback is, I'm just not good at it.
Not good at it, yeah.
And
on the first round,
well, one, you're missing the point. Like, nobody's going to be good at it unless, well, like anything, if you train for years and years, yeah, you can do some crazy things with meditation. But just learning how to focus and then refocus, and that doesn't come by like staring harder at a dot on the wall or whatever. Then when you're in trouble or whatever, you need it. That's what creates this opportunity to enter into like a flow state or a zone when you have calmed or quieted your mind to the point that then you just play freely, unconsciously, and that's when you play your best. So the concentration thing, as we typically talk about it or view it or scream it, it's not accurate or helpful. I would encourage everyone to just start like with a couple of minutes of just sitting in a chair, being aware of your breath, and just think of inhale, exhale, in, out, whatever. And I would try to do that in a quiet environment. And don't get upset with like within 10 seconds you are thinking about what's for lunch.
Yeah.
And then you
That's
just
the point, is to get to
right.
let that happen and then come back to it. Like if the first time you drift away from it, you're like, oh, I must be bad at this. Well, you missed the point. The purpose is to be able to go away and then get yourself to come back.
And then you gently, non-judgmentally bring it back, which then you're practicing being non-judgmental instead of judgmental. And it's just not like the people who are excelling across the board. They use all these tools.
They're all doing it.
And I just don't understand why there's pushback. Like for me, when I was nuts and like, for example, started lifting weights, I was like obsessed. And I was devouring, like, what do these people do who look like that, who are that strong? And I was stealing everything I could. And to me, that's what you want. If you want to be great, if you want to be as good as you can be.
Well, people get so hung up on, like, what's their practice schedule look like? What skills are they practicing? Like, especially in a sport. Not, like, what are they doing, like, holistically to make that person be successful? But people get so hung up on, like, if it's a basketball player, what is their basketball practice schedule and regimen and drills look like, when that's such a, frankly, small percentage of what makes them great. Like, we talked about this 100 times, but you can have all the skill in the world, and sure, by no means are we saying don't practice the skills involved in your sport, but equally, if not more, the mental side. And like you're saying, if the people want to go, like, what's, how often what kind of shots is Steph Curry taking every single day? Like, what's that, how can I do what he does to be as great as he is? But we know he meditates.
Yeah, but he
does visualization. It does all of these other things that are unrelated to a physical skill that make him great.
Well, and that's where everything is on point, including like the very intentional aspect of their training schedule, but also their nutrition, their sleep, and training their minds. Just nothing is left to chance. And when you are like in high school or something, you can get away with it if you have certain physical gifts that some people don't have or many people don't have. I mean, I remember coaching high school boys basketball, and our team, their pregame meal was they'd run to get
Wendy's
cheeseburgers and French fries, and then.
Yep.
But when they went out on the court, I mean, we'd press, the whole game, and some of those kids would never come out, and they were never phased.
Right.
I mean, they.
Meanwhile, you fuel with the cheeseburger. Now you can't go for a walk for 10 minutes without something.
Right. So, but at some point, like when you get to college, all of a sudden everybody's big and everybody's strong, everybody's fast, everybody's good. Then you're having to pay attention. I think they're just, if you can start training these things, start being aware of your sleep, your workouts, your nutrition earlier.
Yeah.
Why not do it? Instead of whatever, eating donuts for your pregame meal. Maybe we shouldn't do that. And the same thing goes with ignoring all of this stuff. And specifically, like using a meditation breath regimen to help you calm your mind is a secret weapon that shouldn't be nearly so secret.
Yeah.
But it still is, especially like across high school club levels.
I was gonna say too, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, we talked about having to form new habits, like breaking old habits and forming new ones. And if for say a high school or club athlete who thinks that, like, well, I can get away with not doing it now, but once I get to college, I'll start practicing those things. Like, it's way harder to, even if it's 2 years down the road, which feels like a short time, to keep doing what you're doing than to start it now in hopes that once you get to that level, okay, then I'll implement nutrition and I'll implement breath work and meditation and visualization. And that's a very hard thing to unwind. And then, like, I mean, by no means are these exceptionally challenging habits, but they're challenging to commit to doing on a regular basis. And if you think that you're just going to get to a certain level and then slap on all these extra things to help enhance your performance.
Well, the
a little
whole
late at that point.
most of the time at the next level, like in college, whenever they start paying more attention to this, it's because, as Russell Thomas says so often and well, they get desperate enough where they want to ameliorate pain, and that's the prime mover, prime motivator. And when they're in high school, I'm scoring 20 points a game.
Right.
We're winning. I'm good. I'm getting recruited. Um, but that's where maybe instead we want to fall in love with the process of what we're doing and becoming excellent rather than just letting these outcomes define us and finding our worth there. Because invariably, what happens with someone in that position, they go to the next level and they are smacked in the face with the reality that, oh, everybody here is really good.
Yep.
Everybody was getting 20 points a game
right.
on their high school team. And now what? So instead, you should be preparing. But that's where, like Michael Gervais, he talks about mastery. Like that's something higher and better and more powerful and meaningful if that's your goal, like truly mastering this process, and or then you've found meaning, purpose beyond performance outcome. But ultimately, this results in better performance outcomes.
Period.
And from when it comes to like these lapses of concentration, like we talked about before, you're either fretting over a mistake that you just made or worrying about the outcomes in the future. And instead of being right here in the now, and that's where the whole point of like watching the seams on the ball is being here and now.
Yeah.
Listening to the sound the ball makes when it hits the racket, that's being here and now. Feeling where your racket is, feeling your footwork, that's because you're here and now, which is the only moment you can control.
Yeah.
It's the only moment where you're living.
Yep.
And to get all Eastern and Zen, that's how we're supposed to be. We're just supposed to stack these moments like I'm living right now. The only moment that I can truly experience is this one
right here.
And if we get better and better at doing that, everything gets better. Like I'm a better father. I'm a better husband. I'm a better employee. I'm a better tennis player.
Well, it doesn't have to just be the moments that like I'm experiencing. This is a great moment right now. Like
right.
Also accepting that they're going to experience and be in moments that are challenging, that are going to build resilience. Like it's not just, oh, I'm experiencing my kids are playing together and it's fun. I'm experiencing that we're at the dinner table and this is wonderful to be the four of us having dinner. And I'm experiencing having this conversation right now. But if you're also willing to experience the things that don't necessarily feel good, like that's kind of how you build that character, build that resilience, and being in all of those moments. I think we tend to just think of being in the moment when it's really, really positive and happy. Right. But equally as important to be in every single moment.
Well, and that's where if being in the moment, and I view this as unpleasant, whatever, it is hard. We have to run sprints. Instead of having a negative, threat perception kind of view of those times, we instead, good, I'm getting tested, I'm getting challenged. This is a chance for me to get tougher. It's an opportunity to get better. This is what I need in order to go where I want to go. Right. Then we just embrace that. That's where, going back to the mastery term again, that's what that is. Yeah. And instead of surviving the hard parts or whatever, no, like dominate the hard parts. Right. I just think life is much richer and your performance is far better if you can use all of these tools and improve your perception and thinking on events where you're not just wishing away moments of your life and days of your life, weeks of your life. I can't wait till Friday. That's a terrible way to live. We miss so much. We miss so many opportunities to connect with other people, which is really what all of this is about.
Life is about.
Thinking that nirvana lies on the weekend. No, let's be right here, right now. And the more we are aware of the need to train that, the more we're going to train it, the better we'll get at it. Just the better everything is. Everything's better. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Unbound Performance Podcast.
Your support helps us continue to build our community. If you're enjoying this content, please like, subscribe, and share.